Welcome to everyone in person here today and everyone who is joining us on the internet. The UU Fellowship of Lake Norman is an open and inclusive congregation. Our members walk diverse paths to find meaning and purpose. Though we are united by our belief in the inherent worth and dignity of all people and but we're united by our belief in the inherent worth and dignity, I apologize, of all, and for the responsibility to express our faith through acts of justice and compassion. My name is Joe Price. I've been an active member of this congregation since 2019, and I've been a Unitarian since 2012. Can you light the chalice, please, Ellery? Please join me in saying our chalice-lighting words that are in your order of service. We light this flaming chalice to illuminate the world of truth. In our search for truth, may we be just. In our search for justice, may we be loving. And in loving, may we find peace. That's not all.
It's time for Reverend Jiminez to give us the story for all ages.
Okay. And then our story for all ages.
Buenos dias.
Buenos dias.
Good morning. It's so good to be with you this morning. And before I share the story for all ages, I would like to share some opening words, if that's okay. And it is such a joy to be here. I was with you 2 years ago, and then I was online with you about a year ago. And this is the first time in a year and a half that I'm in front of a congregation. And you don't know how joyful it is to see your faces and the expression in your eyes at this wonderful gathering. So my opening words are by Gary Kawas. In this quiet hour, may our spirits be renewed. In this gathering of friends and visitors, may we be ready to extend ourselves to those in need, and with trust to receive the hand that is offered. In this community of ideals, may we remember the principles that guide us and reflect upon those things that give meaning to our lives, renewing our dedication to serve the highest that we know. In this time of worship, may our minds be open to new truth and our hearts be receptive to love as we give thanks for this life that we are blessed to share. Welcome, friends, to worship this morning. And our time for all ages today is from a book that is called Latinitas, Celebrating 40 Big Dreamers. And the author is Juliet Menendez. And in her book, she happens to have one little story about Sor Juana Ines de la Cruz, who I will be sharing a little bit about with you today about her theology and her life. So I thought it would be appropriate to share with you this version from this children's book. Ever since she was a little girl sneaking into the cornfields to read forbidden books from her abuelo's library in Mexico, Juana Ines dreamed of going to college. When she was 7 and found out that college was only for boys, imagine that, it was only for boys, she begged her mother to cut off her braids and disguise her in boys' clothes so she could go. But her mother didn't dare. Niñas no pueden ir a la universidad. Girls cannot go to college, she declared. I'll teach myself then, she said. And Juana Ines learned everything from writing poetry and prose to science and the Aztec language of Nahuatl. By the age of 8, she won a writing contest and not only got to see her first play performed, but won a book too. By the time she was 16, news of her brilliant mind had traveled to the ears of the viceroy, who refused to believe that a woman could be so smart. I'll show her, he thought, and invited every respected academic in Mexico to test what she knew. But Juana Ines, believe it or not, she got every single question right. She was offered a place on the viceroy's royal court and received many marriage proposals too. But none of that was what Juana Ines really wanted. She wanted to go to school, but she knew that couldn't happen. Where can I go to write, she wondered. And suddenly, she thought of just the place. What place do you think that was? Back to the cornfields, back to her abuela's library. Well, in her time, that place was a convent. In the peace and quiet of her nun cell, Juana Ines wrote poetry and plays by candlelight. Her ink-stained fingers filled page after page with witty critiques of men in power and the church teachings that tried to keep women out. She sent her manuscripts off to Spain to be published, and with the help of her fellow nuns, turned the convent into a theater. She put on hilarious comedies for the royal court and thinkers of the time, artfully weaving in her feminist messages. Before long, her ideas were sparkling, lively debates that traveled far beyond the convent's walls. And almost 4 centuries later, those very ideas are read and talked about by new generations, still inspiring change. So that's a little bit about Sor Juana Ines de la Cruz, who we will be hearing about today. And in honor of our kids, I wore my Harry Potter robe out to their classes. Go now, Chris.
Autumn is going to come up and talk, of course, a little bit about what's coming up with religious education, and then we'll sing. Oh, this is Autumn.
Hi, I'm Autumn. It was a last minute substitution. I just wanted to tell everybody what we're doing. Last week we had an amazingly successful week with Harry Potter. We had a whole mess of kids at service, and then after service we had, I want to say, more than 20 children here. So I want to make an announcement that we are going to be continuing our Harry Potter theme throughout the year. So it's going to be drop-in, and I know some families had expressed to me that they were going to be able to come to only select services because of the time. But each week I will use this time to kind of tell you what we're doing. And so this week we are working on our illiteracy horcrux. So in Harry Potter, they're fighting the evils. And so here we're going to be fighting some of the bad, evil things in our community. And so we're going to be doing some programs to help literacy in our community. We're starting a book drive this week, and it's going to be going on for the next 3 weeks, where we are collecting used books for our book drive. And we are going to be going to the Exceptional Children Activity Center, I believe it's called. I might be wrong. ECAC, it's here in Davidson, and they work as a nonprofit to help children and adults gain literacy, blind, deaf, dyslexic, and children that have disabilities of all shapes and sizes. So please, if you have any used books, please bring them to service and donate them in our bin, because we will be collecting books for young people and older folks also. So at this time, let's sing our kids, and any adults that want to join and volunteer and work with us in our kids' room, we want to welcome.
Go now in peace, go now in peace. May the spirit of love surround you everywhere, everywhere you may go. And now please be seated, and we have seminary music with my call. Our speaker today is the Reverend Claudia Jimenez, Minister of Faith Development at the Unitarian Universalist Congregation in Asheville since 2018 after graduating the seminary. Prior to the seminary, she served as Director of Religious Education for the UU Fellowship of Vero Beach, Florida for 17 years. And during that time, she ran for office and served on her local school board for 8 years. Her background is in education, having taught elementary school and middle school science in the U.S. and abroad. When not at work, she enjoys Latin dancing, cooking, and Friday Zoom calls with her family. About today's presentation, she said, Sor Juana's commitment to writing and learning during the 1600s in Nueva España, when women were expected to be silent in church, invites us to consider our commitments and the challenges of keeping them. During this pandemic time, what are our commitments to each other and to justice? What can we learn from theologian Sor Juana Ines de la Cruz? The title of her presentation is Public Theology, the writings of Sor Juana Ines de la Cruz. Please help me give a warm Unitarian welcome to Reverend Claudia Jimenez.
As I said earlier, it is really a pleasure to be here, and it's really think 2 years ago, I didn't see a religious educator. So I think it's really awesome that your program is thriving and that you have kids participating in your programs. That's really powerful. And that's what we need, because these are the young people that are gonna go forth and help us build the loving community. So today, before I share my reflection with you, I would like to read a story from the Maya tradition, from the book, The Sea-Ringed World, Sacred Stories of the Americas, edited by Maria Garcia Esperon. And in the introduction, she writes the following: 15,000 years before Europeans stepped foot in the Americas, people had already spread from tip to tip and coast to coast. Like all humans, these Native Americans sought to understand their place in the universe, the nature of their relationship with the divine, and the origin of the world into which their ancestors had emerged. The answers lay in their sacred stories. And I like to think that those sacred stories form what we call theology, even though traditionally theology is about the study of the Word of God, right? But then that always brings us to that question: what God are you talking about? How do you define God? So today, when we look at Sor Juana Ines de la Cruz's theology, I want us to think about what are those sacred stories? What are those stories for us as Unitarian Universalists? And I begin by sharing a story from the Mexican indigenous people about the Bacas. Wardens of the sky, 4 pillars, 4 colors, 4 Bacas. They never tire, they never die. They are the healers. They keep the rights. Before time began, there was Itzmana. He was the universe, and within him all things existed: white and black, good and bad, woman and man, stone and water. One day, Itzama noticed a woman weaving the hems of the cosmos. He called her to him. Her name was Ix-Shebel-Yatz. She wore snakes as a headdress and loved color and beauty. With a soft brush at the edge of space and time, she had painted red the clay she loved, the leaves of some trees, and the crest of the woodpecker. In those distant days, the 13 levels of heaven creaked and groaned, threatening to collapse upon the heads of all living things. Itzmana and Ix-Shebel-Yatz, universe and weaver, husband and wife, looked each other in the eyes, worried. He said, "My wife, as creators, our duty is to endow the world with what it lacks." "You speak of the weight of the heavens?" she asked. "Indeed, I had a dream, perhaps a vision, in which I saw the sky fall upon the earth. We must provide the heavens with supports. I thought about the trees, but not grow high enough to reach from its roots to the clouds." "Leave it to me," said Ix-Shebel-Yatz. "I am a diligent weaver. Besides, I'm your wife." As she left to craft a solution, Itzama crossed his arms and bowed his head, seeking to rest at the edge of a cenote. At that moment, a piece of heaven fell at his feet, disturbing his peace. A few days later, Ix-Shebel-Yatz informed her resplendent husband that they had now 4 sons. She had borne them all at one time. That was how things were done during the age of the gods. "They are called Bacas," set X chevaliers to Isana, each one a different color. They are the product of my hard work and of your concern for the welfare of all living things. They are already prepared to shoulder the weight of heaven. They will stand forever at the four corners of the world, keeping the vault of the sky aloft. The red bacab, Consignal, will guard the east. The white one, Satsini, the north. The yellow one, Hobnid, the south. And the black one, Hosanek, the west. Ixmana gave each of the bacabs a huge ceiba tree to lean upon when they felt fatigue. But it was not necessary, since they had inherited the diligence of their weaker mother. They never tired. Though their muscles were tense and their eyes were fixed on blinking, they never tired of fulfilling their task, holding up the sky. At first, the bacabs were visible to humans, since women and men were dedicated to understanding the world and always in need of cures for their hunger and thirst, their worries and illnesses. People of those early days asked the bacabs for advice, and the gods answered willingly without ceasing to support the sky. They smiled sweetly when they revealed what plant or root could treat some diseases. Over the centuries, the bacabs became covered with foliage and earth, with clouds and dust storms, until their beautiful faces were no longer visible. However, their teachings became rituals, and their words of healing and consolation were engraved in stone using the beautiful glyphs invented by their father, Yitzana, who was also the universe. So this is one story from the indigenous communities of Mexico that in some ways is a theology and explanation of the world and an understanding of how some things come to be or came to be. And theology creates a space to explore the basic questions of meaning in community. Questions such as, what is evil? Are all people inherently good? What am I called to do with my life? How do I lead a good and ethical life? As Unitarian Universalists, we draw from many sources in the search for meaning and understanding. Wise teachers, theologians, world religions, earth-centered traditions, and our own lives inform our understanding of the world. That's a tremendous amount of theological diversity. And as I reflect on the sources that inspire my own journey and that I use in worship, I recognize the gaps. I use limited resources or sources by people of the global majority. Now, what am I talking about, you might wonder. I heard a colleague use this term a few years ago, and I find it to be a term that is affirming, inclusive, and accurate. I use the term people of the global majority as a reminder that the majority of the Earth's population is not white, that whiteness is not a global norm, as I was taught when I was growing up, and many of us were. I see inclusion as a both and practice, bringing in voices of people of the global majority alongside traditional, mostly Eurocentric white voices deepens my understanding and our understanding of the sacred and the diverse stories and histories of the communities we are widening our circle to embrace when we talk about building the beloved community. So Sor Juana is an example of this. And in case you didn't get this from the story, Sor Juana was a nun. She moved to the convent so that she could write. And she was famous for her secular poems and prose depicting life in Nueva España, which is now Mexico, in the 1600s. She is well known in Latinx circles today. How many of you have heard of her? for today. See a couple of hands up, wonderful. Her picture was on the Mexican 200 peso bill for 41 years until 2019. And I had never heard of her, but when I was in seminary, one of my ways of relaxing was to do Netflix binges. Okay, so one of the series that I watched, because it was in Spanish, I also watched one about Celia Cruz, who was a phenomenal salsa singer. But I watched a series that was called Sor Juana, and that's how I was introduced to Sor Juana Ines de la Cruz. And little did I know that she is considered by some religious scholars as the first female theologian in Latin America. And that got me really excited to read her work and then learn more about her. And what impressed me in reading her work and learning about her life was her intelligence and her fearless expression of her opinions. Her life, like that of many women of the global majority today, was constrained by white supremacy culture and its intersection with classism and sexism. So Juana's persistence and courage invites us to consider our commitments to justice and the challenges of staying the course in the face of institutional resistance. This morning, we'll consider the similarities in the struggle against racism and sexism she faced that persist today. Now, Sor Juana lived in a time of strict racial stratification based on birthplace and skin color. White Spaniards and criollos, people of white Spanish parents born outside of Spain, were at the top of the hierarchy. At the bottom were mestizos, mulattos, blacks, and indigenous people. Sor Juana was a criolla. She was born in Nueva España, but had privilege because of her Spaniard parents. Becoming a nun allowed her to pursue her studies and theological interests. She wrote on commission, so she made money while she was writing, and was able to afford an extensive library and live comfortably in Mexico City. Now today, the legacy of the racial stratification of Nueva España continues in Mexican society and other former Spanish colonies, including Colombia, where I was born. It shines a light on the anti-Blackness that persists and that I witnessed and internalized when I lived there as a child. Here in the United States, anti-Blackness persists too. The COVID-19 pandemic has drawn more attention to health and economic inequities that over time have left marginalized people more vulnerable to disease and unemployment during the last 1.5 years. As a denomination that aspires to be not just non-racist, but anti-racist, learning the history of the creation of race and the hidden stories of Black Americans and other people of the global majority living in this country, whose story is our story, is only part of the work we are called to do. Although Sor Juana had privilege because she was a criolla, her gender and birth to an unwed mother kept her at the margins. One of her most well-known poems, Hombres Necios, Foolish Men, calls out the double standard toward women of that time. Sor Juana also used her writing to question the exclusion of women from educational and theological pursuits. I'm going to read a little excerpt in English from a letter she wrote to her confessor, a confessor. His name was Father Antonio Núñez de Miranda, and he counseled her, was her spiritual director, and he monitored her work. Because if you look at this time when she was alive, this was the time of the Inquisition. And so they were really keeping their eyes on her. And she wrote this. She wrote, private and individual study. Who has has forbidden that to women. Like men, do they not have a rational soul? Is a woman's soul not as receptive to God's grace and glory as a man? You know, and for us today, this isn't that much news, right? Because we've made a lot of progress, but in that time, and during the time of the Inquisition, that was a lot of courage to write that and stand by it. So she was ahead of her time in using poetry, drama, and prose as public forms of theological expression. Her work was commissioned by the Spanish royal court and used for both religious and secular ceremonies. And her theological writings were also cutting edge in that they incorporated indigenous perspectives, customs, and the language Nahuatl, which was rare at the time. And she learned that language in the farm where she grew up when she spent time with her grandfather. Another letter that she wrote critiquing a local sermon led to a supposedly anonymous response from the local bishop. Sor Juana wrote a long, forceful response advocating for women's rights and freedom of expression. And this is part of what she wrote, responding to this critique of her saying, no, you need to listen to the women too. And she said that I preferred an opinion contrary to that of Father de Vero was audacious. But as a father, was it not audacious for him to speak against the three holy fathers of the church? My reason, such as it is it not as unfettered as his, as both issue from the same source? Is his opinion considered as a revelation that we must accept blindly? Again, that courage to speak up against the powers that be, especially in the church. This frankness did not win her favor with the church. A few years later, she was forced to sign a series of documents pledging loyalty to the church, asking for forgiveness and renouncing for writing. She retreated to monastic life and died at the age of 46 in 1695 as the result of a pandemic that spread, a contagious disease that spread through the continent. So although Sor Juana was ultimately censured throughout her life, she remained committed to calling out the Catholic Church's marginalization of women. Her persistence, given the time she lived, is remarkable. Today, women in many denominations have been welcomed into ministry and theological education. However, women continue to face barriers because of their gender in our country and abroad. In the United States, COVID-19 has had a disproportionate impact on women, especially women of the global majority, who have most of the caregiving responsibilities and jobs classified as essential. School and daycare closures in the last few years have resulted in women leaving their jobs, reducing their work hours, or being laid off. It is time to change policies influenced by sexism and racism that do not support women's roles as workers and parents. And as many of you know, there are bills going through our government that will support children and families that are being contested by those who think that that is not how we should be spending our money. So we do still have a lot of work to do. Just as Sor Juana chose to remain committed to challenging the dogmas and injustices of her time, may we also remain committed to challenging economic and racial injustices in our country. And as we continue to explore the theology that grounds our Unitarian Universalist faith, may we choose to deepen our search for meaning by intentionally seeking out and welcoming diverse voices and stories. May it be so.
Yes. This fellowship is important to us all. The contributions we make today allow us to sustain and grow our congregation and to reach out to the community, both nearby and in the larger world. We're giving the firms our commitment to each other and to the community. The collection will now be taken. With grateful hearts, we receive these gifts. May they encourage us to live the lives of integrity, compassion, and peace. Please look with me now at the order of service for our announcements. Spiritual exploration, Autumn mentioned it earlier. We will have a weeknight teen program in person this fall. Besides being fun for the young people, it will focus on social responsibility and be free and dogma. Registration is open now. Please let family, friends, and neighbors of teens know about this opportunity as we continue to build our fellowship. We will continue with our classes for children ages 4 to 12 during the Sunday afternoon services. And of course, all of us the connection to get information about that. Movie Tuesdays, we go to movies on Tuesday afternoon, usually at Burkeville or Davidson, followed by a snack and a time to chat and talk about the movie we just saw. It's a lot of fun. If you're interested in doing that and participating in that, or getting on the mail list, contact Linda Heidenberg, and her email address is in the order of service. The UU Book Club, the next meeting is September 15th at 7:30 via Zoom. The book is Cast by Isabel Wilkerson. The service schedule, we will continue meeting at 3 o'clock at the Friends Meeting House here, this beautiful location from here forward. On September the 12th, we're going to have a multi-congregational workshop on redistricting here, led by, is it going to be here? Mm-hmm. Yeah, led by Lisa Garcia Simpson, some of you may know. Okay, with that, closing song.
I just want to encourage you all to come out to the redistricting. It's very important. September 12th. Here. So our song is Love Will Guide Us, 131, all 3 verses. Love will guide us, peace and stride us, hope inside us, will lead the way on the road from free to giving. Love will guide us through the hard night. If you cannot sing like angels, if you cannot speak before God, you can give from deep within you. You can change the world with your love. Love will guide us, peace will guide us, hope inside
lead the way on the road from pain to giving. Love will guide us through the hard life.
Indeed, love will guide us, and as we close this time together, I share with you closing words from Susan Carlson. We leave blessed by our connections to one another, to the spirit of life. Walk lightly that you see the life that is below your feet. Spread your arms as if you had wings and could dance through the air. Feel the joy of the breath in your lungs and the fire in your heart. Live to love and be a blessing on this earth. Friends, go in peace. It has been a tremendous delight to be with you today, and I encourage you to attend the redistricting workshop that is being held here. This is our next important work in supporting building a more just world. So I encourage you to participate. Thank you for allowing me to be here today.
Thank you. It was an excellent presentation. We bridged the gap 400 years. It was extraordinary, and it was extraordinarily relevant. We extinguish our chalice. We extinguish our chalice, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we meet again. Go in peace. Great job.